true that I'm a very like big optimist. Like I can see a very bright future for agents. But maybe also it's interesting to talk about the other side of the equation, which is that I do feel that this technology is going to break society as we know it. Like the
Yeah,
model, the economic model of society is this, right? People get a job, they perform some economic activity that is useful for a company or a government or agriculture or whatever, and they get a salary, and with that salary, they go to the supermarket and they buy groceries and they pay rent, right? This is the business model of society. This model is
yeah,
going to break. In the next decade, that model does not work anymore because I think I don't know what the numbers are, but I would say that more than half of existing jobs will be automated in the next decade, and they will not be easily replaced. Like people, it's you can re-educate people, but you cannot do it at the speed that generative AI is improving capabilities. You like training people is slower than training AI models by now.
Hi, friends, and welcome to this very exciting episode of Leading with Data. Today, I have with me Xander Steenbrook, and Xander and I have been connected for now about 7 years. And the first time I met him was in 2018 at Data Hack Summit, where he presented a talk on reinforcement learning and in real time showed people how to play Mario using
Right.
reinforcement learning. 2018 that happened, then we stayed in touch. 2019 we again had an opportunity to host you, and that year you showed GANs and a demo of taking my picture, showing how I would have looked at in my childhood all the way up to how I age. So and both of those are the trends which Xander demoed and displayed and researched before ChatGPT came to the world. And then I
Mhm.
feel that those are the two basic components how we were able to create a technology like ChatGPT. So through today's discussion, and I'm hoping I learned a few more things which I can use going forward in future, and looking forward to the discussion. Welcome
Right.
to the show.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Great. So, Zenda, last time when we discussed, right, and then I'm just covering this for the audience. So you studied civil engineering, uh, majored in electronics, figured out electronics is not where your interest lies, and then
Right.
you went on to do a PhD, which was on brain and machine interface, which is where
Yeah.
you stumbled on machine learning, right? And then you have spent quite a bit of time on reinforcement learning, and
Hmm.
GANs was one of the areas. So tell us about your journey since then. So since we last met, and I see you
Yeah.
have also started Eden.art. So would love to hear what has
Yeah, a
happened
little bit of
since
my
then
journey.
at your
Sure.
end. Yeah.
Sure. So I guess a lot of people will probably know me initially from my YouTube channel, Archive Insights, that I started while I was doing my PhD. So I basically realized like, hey, I'm reading a lot of papers, and it's actually a lot of work to read papers. It like takes time and effort. And I started making videos to basically explain the stuff that I had just learned. And then, these videos got popular because I feel like I was among the first people to start doing educational science in the machine learning space. Um, and then basically, I got offered a job in America by a company called Learn Ventures, who was basically
Hmm.
focusing on online courses. And so I basically worked for them for a couple of years doing online courses, which was actually
Hmm.
really fun. Like I really enjoyed teaching. Um,
Hmm.
I did that for a couple of years, and then basically there was another company from the same person who had reached out to me, and they were doing they had a startup in Boston that was doing protein engineering. They were doing
Interesting.
synthetic biology using machine learning. And
Hmm.
I was very interested to figure out, like what is that about? And so I decided to go work for them, which
Hmm.
was like amazing. I had to learn a lot of biology that I hadn't seen in my educational track. And I'm very glad that I got into that field because it's really
And which year
fascinating. What
was
is
this? In which year was
this was probably 20. I want to say 2020 that I
this?
started
Okay,
working there. So
interesting.
like three years ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so what I was doing there was essentially using models like AlphaFold to do AI-assisted protein design. So basically, there was a team of biologists and chemists who were in the lab in Boston, and they would send me specific requirements. We need a protein that can bind to this target or that has these specific specifications. And then I would go into my computer and run a whole bunch of machine learning models to try and come
Wow.
up with new synthetic proteins, and they would then get
Mm-hmm.
manufactured in the lab. The company is called Amid Technologies, and they're actually
Mm-hmm.
doing really well. And like this whole field of like generating stuff with AI, it actually started like taking off like back then. So like I remember in my spare time I was looking at things like StyleGAN, and then I was looking at like clip guided diffusion, clip guided
Mm-hmm.
DQGAN, like all of these like very early rough generative AI methods.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my spare time I was always sort of experimenting with these new techniques and models, and I was sort of noticing that they were getting a lot better. They were getting a lot more rich in terms of the outputs that you can generate with them. They were also getting a lot more steerable, where like previously you had to train a GAN on a data set and then it could only do that thing. But now these
Mm-hmm.
new text to image models, they showed that you can actually steer them by user inputs. And so this whole field looked like, okay, this is actually getting very, very interesting. And then
Yeah.
at some point, like, yeah, I started going to Mars College that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I was going to America for 2 months every year to live in the desert with a bunch of like-minded people who are also like experimenting with startup ideas and projects. And then I met Gene Kogan, who maybe some of you might know. He's like also like a very early person in the machine learning field, and we
Mm-hmm.
became friends, and we started like doing projects together. We started like brainstorming, and like very gradually this like project formed where we were sort of like we
Mm-hmm.
were building these generative AI tools on top of like early models like clip guided diffusion, and then now we're building on top of stable diffusion. And so gradually this project kind of grew, and it got legs and it got arms. And then at some point we realized, hey, we're actually spending a lot of time building this like generative AI engine, and we're actually very excited about the future of this technology. Why don't we turn this into a company? Why don't we just start a business? And then
Mm-hmm.
I think roughly a year ago we decided to incorporate. And so now Gene and I have a startup called Eden. Eden.art
Yeah.
is the
Mm-hmm.
website. And the basic premise is that we're seeing this emergence of this like radically new possibility space that generative AI is providing. And this is
Mm-hmm.
powered in part by the language models that obviously became incredibly impressive, like ChatGPT, and now all of the new Llama and the open source Mistral ones. But also like the models that can generate images and video and audio, and all of these generative models that are now kind of like lying in these different modalities of image, video, audio, text. Like in the future, this is all going to become one thing, right? These
Yeah.
massive multimodal AI models that can generate anything that you can specify.
Mm-hmm.
And we're sort of like, yeah, anticipating this to have a very, very dramatic impact on people's lives and on the economy. And
Mm-hmm.
so we kind of wanted to put a startup there in that space because we feel like this is where you want to be. If you want to be an important person in the future and you want to sort of decide the future direction of the world, that is the space where you want to start building something and start making something. Um, so I guess that's kind of like, yeah, the journey that I've been
That's
through in the
very,
past couple of
very,
years. Yeah.
very interesting. And given that you were in, synthetic protein space in 2020, how was COVID for you? I'm presuming
Yeah.
that's a lot of maddening action to
It was
see.
actually very interesting because I remember
Hmm.
when COVID hit, I had just started working at Amid, and
Hmm.
we were pretty early on in the sort of AI assisted protein discovery design cycle. Like we were kind of
Hmm.
still like getting our hands wet, but we had an actual project where we were trying to look for a really good COVID binder. So I actually ran a whole bunch of GPU jobs for a couple of weeks to try and design COVID binders, and some of which we actually manufactured in the lab, and they had some affinity to binding with the COVID spike protein. And so it sort of put the whole thing that we were doing into a very useful perspective, because we realized
Yeah.
the technology we're working on has very specific applications to the thing that we're going through. And I'm very optimistic that over the next decade we can bring this technology to the point where if a new epidemic basically takes over the world, in literally a couple of weeks we could design new proteins that could target a new virus. Of course,
Mhm.
manufacturing a vaccine and scaling it up to like billions of vaccines still takes time, but at least the
Yeah.
initial discovery phase of how can we attack this virus, that can drastically be improved with all these new techniques for sure. Yeah.
Very interesting. And for someone who wants to, let's say, get into this space and learn the space, what would you recommend, and what are some of the
Yeah.
things this person can
So actually, the last two videos that I made on my YouTube channel were kind of exactly this. They were an
do? Hmm.
attempt by me as a computer science person, because I really am a computer science person who got
Hmm.
introduced into this field of biology to try and give a
Right.
little bit of an entry course. Like if you're into programming, but you're kind of interested in like, biology looks kind of cool, maybe I should take a look at it. I think my last two videos are a good starting point. And from
Hmm.
there on, there's a bunch of links to the literature. You should probably read some of the important papers like AlphaFold by DeepMind, but also like actually surprisingly, Facebook, Meta has done a lot of interesting work in the protein design space. And then there is
Hmm.
the Baker Lab. Baker
Okay.
Lab is like a biology lab who's doing a lot of pioneering work, and they're kind of known for being sort of like the open source heroes of protein design stuff. Like everything they make is incredible and is all open source. So I feel like they're also something
Interesting.
to look at.
Wow, great. And the current startup you're working on, right? So if I go to Eden.art today, this looks like a community sourced
Right.
models.
Yeah.
So help me understand, what it is doing today, and then, how does it
Right.
translate into the multimodal journey which you mentioned?
Okay, so the sort of the thing we've noticed is that there is a lot of these AI art generators. Like let's take Midjourney for example, right? Midjourney is
Mhm.
amazing. It generates amazing images, but there's this one problem, which is that everyone uses the same Midjourney. We're all using the
Yeah.
same model, and so a
Hmm.
lot of people that are like professional artists, they often don't really like Midjourney as much because it's very hard to make something with Midjourney that doesn't look like Midjourney. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And so the
Yeah.
thing that we started doing with Eden is that we make it very, very easy to make your own AI model. So basically we
Hmm.
have a lot of our current customers are artists who have a practice, maybe they're painters or sculptors or photographers, and they will basically you can upload a lot of your own work to the platform, and then we fine tune a stable diffusion model for you. And so now you have
Hmm.
a very custom AI model that is your style. Like it's very personalized, and you can use it to make images that you cannot make anywhere else. And so it's this first step towards personalizing all these generative AI models. Um, the next phase, the thing we're working on really hard right now, is to basically have a feedback loop,
Hmm.
because one of the problems that we're seeing is that if you put somebody in front of a prompt window and you ask them, type a prompt, it's actually very difficult. Like the option space is so large, you can type anything, that people
Yeah.
actually get a little bit paralyzed because they don't really know what they want. It's like actually very hard to specify exactly what you're looking for. And this is only going to get worse. Like the output space of these generative models is increasing so rapidly that we
Hmm.
just don't know what to do with it. It's too big. And so
Right.
we are also very interested in sort of the curating layer. Like how can you build a system on top of generative AI which does a bunch of things for you. So we're building a lot of agents. You can actually
Hmm.
build your own creative agent that can then go and talk to the generative models in your stead, it can make a whole bunch of things for you. It then comes back to you and presents you, look, here's what I've done. And then the idea is that you as a human, you give it feedback. You do RLHF or you label some things and you basically tweak what your agent is doing. And so it's this
Mhm.
like layer in between a person and the big future generative foundation models that is trying to learn, like, how can I talk to these big foundation models in your
Mhm.
stead, to make it do what you're looking for, to make it do what you want. So we're kind of trying to build an agent layer that is smart and listens to you and learns who you are and what you want, and it will use the big generative foundation models in your stead.
Interesting. So in some sense, it's a bet that prompt engineering as an interface would be replaced by these autonomous agents who
Well,
would probably
you
be,
will yeah, you will still prompt the agent, but I think
yeah, of course.
the bet is that the design space that these generative models will operate in is going to become so large, like the specifications are so vast that humans don't really, they become paralyzed by too many options. There's just too many
Hmm.
choices, too many things to do. And so you want a smart layer that kind of like learns a little bit about you. It knows what you're interested in, it knows what you want. Like, it tries to help you to talk to these big models. um, and so, like, in a way, we're starting this as a platform that's focused on sort of the artistic sector and, like, creative
Hmm.
professionals that want to leverage generative AI models. But in the future, we're actually looking to open this up to, like, any kind of media, because, like,
Hmm.
these generative models are going to become so powerful that you can generate anything. And so this could become the next kind of YouTube in a sense, right? Like,
Right.
this is why we're sort of focusing this as like a community driven platform, because we're trying to get a lot of like young creative folks here as creators that do all kinds of different things. And we have this social media layer where you can look at feeds of other people, like what is everyone else doing, you can follow people. And sort of like the long-term vision of this is much bigger than just the art industry. But art is a really good place to start because you have
So
a lot
you're
of talented focused people. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're starting with art, and at some point, video becomes a natural extension
Right.
to it.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Right. Right.
and interesting. And with your interactions and whatever you have seen working with these artists and people in art, what are how are they looking at the space? And
Yeah.
then how has been generative AI for them based on whatever you have seen?
So I think it's interesting that there is like two camps. There is a
Hmm.
lot of people still that are pretty afraid about these tools. That there's a lot of traditional artists who have a practice, like, imagine you're a painter, you've practiced that skill, you've mastered the art of painting. It took you 20 years to do it, and now suddenly there's a machine that comes along, and if you type the right prompt, it makes something that looks very similar to what you spent 20 years mastering. And so I think a lot of people still feel threatened by this new technology. And I think they have really good reasons to feel threatened. Like, this thing, like, you cannot lie about this. It will automate a lot of people's jobs. This is going to happen. And I
Yeah.
do think that as a society, we don't really have good answers yet about, like, how do we change the world if this starts happening at a massive scale. Like, I don't think we are very well prepared for this. The only thing that I do know is that if you want to thrive in the new world that's coming, I think the only option is to learn how to use these models. And the thing that I'm happy to say is that most of the people that we were able to convince, give it a try out Eden, train your own model, and see what you can create. I think most people have felt incredibly empowered because they realized, like, hey, instead of this thing taking away my job, it's actually not really what's happening. This thing is basically amplifying what I can do. It's basically, I really like this term, it's an imagination amplifier, because you,
Hmm.
as the human curator, you still have to drive it. You still have to steer where to go. You have to set up the initial prompts. You have to feed it the right training data. You are still behind the steering wheel, but you're suddenly in a car that can drive much faster and much further, and you can go in all kinds of directions, right? And so I think the core idea of Eden is to try and empower creatives with this new sort of like armor that they can wear, which is all of the generative AI tools. Yeah.
Interesting. And do you see uh, artists using these tools more for brainstorming, more for actually creation itself? So, for example, at least in text, and I'm primarily more of a writer than an artist. So
Right.
the use case I have seen working well for me is when I use it as a brainstorming tool as opposed to writing. Writing, I still feel I could do a better job. I'll
Right.
still
Right. Right.
take assistance, but not rely on it. How, any reads on how are these artists seeing these tools, and any reads on that?
So I think this is a very broad question. I think a lot of people have their own sort of personal use cases for it. Um,
Mhm,
it's I think it's very all over the place. Like if you scroll through the creation feed on Eden, you can see all kinds of different things. There's
mhm,
people that are making sketches on paper and that are then turning it into like, artworks using a model that they've trained and things like ControlNet, for example, where you can take a shape and use it to guide a creation. There's people making video on our platform. Like we're looking to integrate models like Sora by OpenAI,
mhm,
the video models, and I can really see a future where like maybe a year from now there's these thousands and thousands of creators that make incredibly rich and compelling video content, which is indistinguishable from Netflix today. But now suddenly every high school kid with a rich imagination can go build his own Game of Thrones series with generative AI. And if you think about it, it's so incredibly powerful. Like we'll have this, like think of how YouTube came to be such a big platform, right? It allowed
yeah.
anyone to make a little video, upload it, and find an audience for what they were interested in. And I think that same thing is going to happen at a much bigger scale, because now you don't even need a camera or hire actors or go somewhere. You only need a great imagination, and AI will actually do the visualization for you. And I think it's potentially sort of like the biggest leap in creative technologies that we've ever witnessed. And I'm also very excited about the open-endedness of it all, because if you think about it, there's really no specific limits to what generative models could generate. And so I'm actually
Mhm,
very excited to see what people will come up with in terms of like I'm very sure that like 1 or 2 years from now, you'll be able to watch a movie that was generated by AI that just blows your mind so incredibly hard that it's really wild to watch. And so
mhm.
I'm just curious to see what people can create if we make these tools like accessible and easy. Yeah.
Interesting. A couple of follow-up questions on that, right? So, for an artist today to come to Eden and create this art and share, uh, one motivation obviously is to learn the tools and then experience
Right.
this technology. Is there anything else which they would be motivated by, or at this stage it is experiencing this creation?
Yeah, as I said, like I think a lot of artists are realizing that they can sort of amplify their own sort of creative process by integrating some
Mhm,
of these AI tools. I think the thing that we're trying to do, which is kind of hard, is that it's relatively easy to experiment with some external AI tool. It's still pretty
yeah,
difficult to make AI sort of part of your process. Like it's easy
right.
to go somewhere and like type a prompt into Midjourney and see like, oh, this is cool, but it's actually kind of hard to think about your process, like how you do your work, and then like add AI on top of that. And so this is why we're building Eden. Is we basically want Eden to feel like an extension of what you're already doing, rather than a totally new thing that you now have to go and learn. Yeah.
And to actually create that extension, how much time does it typically take from an artist? Is it a few hours, few days?
So
So how much time do I
yes.
need to spend? Yeah.
So I think it depends on like what you want to do, but like for example, to give you a very clear example, just uploading a couple of images of things that you've done before and training a model takes like 10 minutes. It's really quick.
Mhm.
It's really easy. It's really easy to try. And then once you have that model, it's a personalized model that can generate images in exactly your style that you want. Then you can of course start doing all kinds of things, right? Like then we have a lot of different tools to make images and video and all that kind of stuff, and then you can start experimenting. The thing that we're noticing is that there is still some learning barrier. Like you have to sort of know about what is possible on the platform, and where something like Midjourney just provides you a prompt box, we actually have a lot of tools that you can learn. And so one thing that we're trying to build now is we're trying to build AI agents that can actually help you use the tools, because we're sort of anticipating this future where there's going to be so many different tools that generative AI has to offer, that as a human it's almost like impossible to keep up with all of these things. Like even for me as a builder, like it's insane, like the amount of new
Yeah.
papers and new GitHub repositories, like no human can keep track of this. And so it would be amazing if I just have an AI agent that keeps track of all this new stuff and it knows how to use it, and I can just talk to it and I can tell it what I'm looking for, and it will interface with the tools for me. And so that's really sort of the longer term vision that we're trying to build. Yeah.
And is there a check where, for example, the art which I'm uploading has been actually created by me, or as a
That's a
user, I
great
can pick
question.
create?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this is actually a great question. So right now, what we do is that in our terms of service, we actually ask that everyone who uploads work is, we ask them like, do you own the rights to these images? Of course,
Mhm.
you can lie about this, right? Because there is no way for us to actually check. We can't
Yeah.
check, but we do actually ask people to like make sure that you own these images before you upload them. Yeah. And then there's another thing that if you train a model, that data is kept private and is never like put anywhere online. And also you can train a private model which is never like opened to the public, so you can always keep your stuff private if you really want to. And there's actually a lot of people that do that, that train private models and then delete the training data. um, but there is a like I think sort of a little bit of a renaissance going on in trying to figure out like how do we deal with copyright in the new generative AI world. And it's a very tricky issue. I think it will take a little bit longer before people, like how the law always like lags a little bit behind the technology. Um, but I think that gradually a lot of people are sort of converging towards this idea that we need some kind of provenance layer that is basically in charge of tracking ownership. And the thing about ownership here, I think, in the generative AI industry is very interesting because it feels a lot more fluid. Like if you are a painter and you make a painting, it's your painting, you own the rights. But if
Yeah.
in generative AI, if you make something, in a lot of cases, that creation is actually derived from a lot of different things, right? There is
Right.
the person who trained the model, there is the person who made the training data that trained the model, and then there's the person who typed in the prompt, and there's all these different things that combined to make an image. And so I think there's actually very interesting data models that can be built around this, like provenance layers, where for every creation there is some sort of tree of dependencies that converge to that creation. And I think a lot of interesting design spaces are possible there. So we're kind of interested in experimenting with this. Yeah.
Interesting. And so I see the platform doesn't charge as of now. So from a business model perspective, is there a model you would try?
Yeah.
And right now, is this getting funded from your own savings, or have you raised a
So
series?
initially, yeah, we did a little bit of our own savings, and then we have some investors now. But basically, the model is very simple. When you start on Eden, you have a few credits. You can make a couple of hundred images. You can train a one custom model, and then you'll run out of credits. And then we have subscription models, basically to get credits every month. Um, in the future, what we're actually more interested in is this kind of marketplace where there's a bunch of people that are sharing generative AI models, and sort of like they're training models on their own aesthetic, and they're also generating like what we call pipelines, a generative AI pipeline that does a specific thing. And then
Hmm.
the idea is that we want to build a marketplace around this, where like anyone can go to this marketplace. You can hire a creative worker, whether that's a human or an AI agent. It could be both. And then basically this acts as a marketplace for creative work, and we just take a small cut on every transaction. That's the business model that we want to build. Yeah.
Interesting. And uh, going forward from, let's say, the overall venture perspective, there are three, four different streams, right? So there is evolution based on technology, which you would obviously need to bake in. There is also, distribution. So how do you get, let's say, more artists on the platform? So what are some of the, let's say, top two or three things which need to happen for Eden to get on that hockey stick growth from here?
Yeah, so I think the thing is that artists are actually pretty clever people, and they're usually looking for like they want to use the latest and greatest technology. And
Yeah.
so behind the scenes, we've been working really, really hard over the past 2 months to build a system. I don't know if you're familiar with this tool called Comfy UI. Comfy UI is a new sort of like, very popular framework for building generative AI pipelines. It's basically a
Mhm.
node-based interface. It's node-based.
Interesting. Hmm.
And so now you can build a generative AI pipeline by dragging nodes into a user interface. And this is like becoming very, very popular in the sort of like cutting edge scene of people that are doing new stuff. And so we've just made it very, very easy to deploy these generative AI pipelines built in ComfyUI as like endpoints on our website. And so what we want to do over the next 2 months is build this incredibly rich arsenal of tools, and then also have AI agents that can use them for you, and you can just talk to them in natural language. Because I think
Hmm.
the thing that we are in a really good position to do is that there's these two problems, right? There's like, on the one hand, artists want to use all of the greatest tools and they want to have an enormous diversity of what they can do. But at the same
Hmm.
time, if you want to do that, suddenly, well, you have to learn all these tools. It's really complicated.
Yeah.
It takes time. You need user interfaces. It's like very complicated. And I think for the first time ever, we have a technology, which is LLMs, where you can replace all of that with just a language interface. You just talk to the model, and the agent will figure out how to use the tools in your stead. And so we're trying to combine these two things where you can do a lot of stuff, like all of the cutting edge tools are there, but you use them through one interface. It's just your agent, and you talk to it and you tell it what to do. And so I think there's a like a great potential here to build a new user interface for creative technologies that is, much more diverse and at the same time much easier to use than anything we've had before. And so we're talking to a lot of like pretty famous big artists to see if they want to experiment with our alpha version, because like all of this that I'm talking about is not live on the website yet. This is all stuff that we're working on. So like the
Yeah.
current the current platform is like a demo version, right? It's like an MVP.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah,
And just thinking aloud now, so theoretically speaking, you could, for example, take the video feed and the mic, and the
right.
agent takes that as additional input, and for all practical purposes, you're just explaining instead of writing
Yes,
prompts. So this becomes as close to a
absolutely.
human interaction.
Absolutely, and there's this other thing, which is that like right now, so you can run LLMs almost in real time. I don't know if you know this service called Grok. It's basically a
Yeah,
startup, and they're running
it's
LLMs like
phenomenal.
at
Yeah,
super super fast, right? And then you've got
correct.
technologies like Whisper that can do real time, speech to text. You've got things like 11 Labs that then translate text back into audio. And then
Audio.
we have video models. They're not super fast yet, but they will be. Give this like one
Yeah.
more year, and video models are going to be real time. And so what you're seeing is this like generative AI technology that's converging to something that works in real time. And so we're also very excited to do this thing that you're saying, where you turn on your microphone and your screen, and you just have a conversation with the agent, and the agent is just there. Like it talks to you, it moves, it has a whole persona. And instead of it becoming this like offline feedback loop, it's suddenly like a real-time creative process. But there is an agent sitting there that is incredibly smart. It knows all of the techniques, it knows all the tools, and it also learns who you are. Like it actually, you have a
Right.
relationship with it. And so I think it's incredibly hard to imagine what this could lead to, but I think it's already like you can start to feel how this, becomes a whole different thing, right? If you can talk to your
Yeah.
computer and your computer knows who you are, and it can do all the things. So yeah, I feel like this feels to me a little bit like a technology which in 5 years we're not gonna be able to look back anymore and realize like we just can't imagine what this is going to enable. I think, yeah, it's pretty
Yeah, it
powerful.
in some sense it's trying to visualize how the world was before smartphones came in and
Yeah,
you
or before the
struggled. So,
internet.
but
Exactly.
just
Exactly.
but just
Yeah.
crunched into shorter time frames.
Yeah.
Uh, Very interesting. So you clearly are very excited and passionate about use of agents in these different interfaces, right? You mentioned onboarding. You mentioned interacting with these LLMs. Are there any other uses of agents which you think would become really big in themselves? And outside of agents, what are some of the things which you think are going to play big role in next 2, 3, 5 years time frame?
I I honestly feel like agents are going to be huge. Like I think it's like the thing that we're seeing now is like a very early like child version. Like agents are not that good yet. Like ChatGPT is impressive, right? I use GPT-4 every day. It's impressive, but I don't feel like I have a relationship with it. Like, I go to it and every time it's this like static tool that I can ask a question, but it doesn't really
Mhm.
learn who I am. It doesn't like change over time that much. And I think this is going to change. I think the thing that really makes agents work is that they feel like they're dynamic. They learn what
Yeah,
you want, they adapt, and you can really watch them, you can observe them change. And I think that really dramatically changes something, because now, instead of a tool, now it's almost like you have a companion. You have something
yeah,
that like remembers and changes, and you can like give it directions, and I think that really changes the game. I'm also pretty this is an area that I feel like has been looming for the past decade, and it's been actually going slower than I thought it would, but like reinforcement learning, to apply all of this agent stuff to like physical robotics, I
yeah,
think is also like I so for the people who know this, like OpenAI trained this video model called Sora, which
sure.
is a
Yeah,
really good like video predictor. And their whole idea there is that they want to use this for robotics. This
yeah,
maybe sounds a little weird. Why do you need a video model for robotics? Well, if your video model is really good at taking a video frame and predicting how that video is going to roll forward, which is a video generation model, then you can apply it to a robot camera, and the robot can think about possible futures. Like, what if I go
yeah,
here? What if I do this? How would the future of the world look like based on my possible actions? And then you can start doing planning in this like virtual generative space. And so OpenAI is definitely thinking about robotics. I think they are also realizing that we can take all of the advancements of like, advanced reasoning that LLMs can do now, and you can apply it to robotics. And so
right.
I think we'll first start seeing digital agents that are purely, assistants in the digital space. But I think in the
Mhm.
next 5 years, we'll also start seeing the first like physical agents that can actually walk around and do stuff. I really like this. I forgot who coined it, but there's this like, you know how like the Turing test is a little bit like, like it's kind of hard to define. And someone came up with a really good test that I like for robotics. He said, like, we'll
Mhm.
have really good robotics when you can take a robot and you can put it in any house on planet Earth and it can make a cup of coffee. Because if you think
Interesting.
about it, that's a very interesting challenge. Because, like, if I put you in a house in, like, South America, like in Chile, or I put you in
Yeah,
China or in Congo, making coffee is very, very different. And you have to generalize very well, with surroundings and sort
depending
of
on the
like,
surroundings,
it's a very
correct.
very difficult challenge. Even for a person, it's actually very difficult, right?
Yeah, yeah, that is true. Yeah, I mean, you would need to make a filter coffee if you're in South India. If you're in uh, uh, England, you would create it differently. So clearly,
Exactly. Yeah.
that's a good test. Interesting.
And so
Uh,
maybe quickly, because I also feel like it's true that I'm a very like big optimist. Like I can see a very bright future for agents. But maybe also it's interesting to talk about the other side of the equation, which is that I do feel that this technology is going to break society as we know it. Like the
yeah,
model, the economic model of society is this, right? People get a job, they perform some economic activity that is useful for a company or a government or agriculture or whatever, and they get a salary, and with that salary, they go to the supermarket and they buy groceries and they pay rent, right? This is the business model of society. This model is
yeah,
going to break. In the next decade, that model does not work anymore because I think I don't know what the numbers are, but I would say that more than half of existing jobs will be automated in the next decade, and they will not be easily replaced. Like people, it's you can re-educate people, but you cannot do it at the speed that generative AI is improving capabilities. You like training people is slower than training AI models by now. And
yeah,
so we're gonna have to figure out like how do we deal with this, right? And I think this is a very, very big global challenge. And honestly, I haven't seen like there's this person called Tristan Harris who has some interesting ideas, but in
yeah,
general, I feel like this is the problem of our generation is like how do we make sure that all of the economic gains that we can get from artificial intelligence, which are huge, like that all of these productivity gains that they get distributed among people instead of going to a few big tech companies that can actually train these models, right? I think that that's a
yeah.
huge challenge. Yeah.
True. That is true. And Sam Altman has written this article, I think, in 2021 called Moore's Law of Everything. I don't know if you've read that,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
almost tries to paint out a world in this scenario, and then it's just phenomenal that it's how it is actually playing out.
Yeah. So the thing that I sort of anticipate is that in if things go well, I think we will have a system that's a little bit like universal basic income, where like
Mhm.
most of the basic things are provided for, like food is free and everyone has housing and there's these like basic needs that are met. And then I
Mhm.
think a lot of people will have the choice to do work on top of that. Like nobody will have to do work. If you don't
Yeah,
want to, you can just have a basic, like you have everything you need. And I think a lot of the sort of human labor is going to be like in two camps. I think it's either going to be very interpersonal, so it's going to be stuff like care, for
yeah,
example. Because I think a lot of these things, like we actually want them to be humans. Like I think it's a very
yeah,
natural thing. We want to care for each other, like spending more time with children, with elderly, like those kinds of jobs. And then I think the second one is creative work, because I think humans still have this like creative engine that I think is much more powerful than what any of these AI models can do. And so this is really a little bit of like the underlying bet with Eden is that the creative economy is going to grow tremendously because a lot of people won't have to do the sort of typical work, the things that we call work now, and they will have more
Mhm.
time to spend on creative quote unquote work. And I think this is like one area where I do see like people will actually have a great time. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, that is true. Although I think on the first one, I think I can almost visualize a second universe as well, where machines which don't have their own biases and can understand humans, read emotions, could actually be better caretakers. But
Better
but
caretakers?
we'll see.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, yeah. It's gonna be very interesting to watch this all unfold. Like it's kind of impressive that you can say like we'll watch this unfold in the next 10, 20 years, right? It's gonna happen quickly.
Yeah, correct, correct. Great. And let's say you were not doing Eden right now. What are, let's say, two, three ideas or directions where you would probably place your bet on, or would recommend some, if there is a person looking out to explore new ideas,
Yeah.
they could probably build a venture in those directions.
So I think that the first one I already said is like robotics. I think is up for a
Yeah,
great revival. I think reinforcement learning on robotics has been like doing its thing for the past decade, and there's been all
yeah,
of these like improvements that are actually I think finally going to bear fruit because like all of this research, all of this optimization algorithms. I think now finally you have the tools like the reasoning engine, the LLMs is basically the brain that sit on top of the engine, and I think all of this will suddenly come together. So I think robotics is an interesting space. And then secondly, I think agents, like getting good at building agents is a
hmm,
superpower. Because I think what every smart person in the world will start doing over the next 5 years is to take a lot of the things that you do and have an agent learn how to do that thing and basically amplify what your output is. I think becoming good at building your own agents, and agents will do all kinds of things, right? You'll have an agent that reads all of your email and it deals with all of your taxes and your accounting and it pays your bills and it only goes to you when there's like something really important or personal that you need to look at. But for the most part, it will do all that automatically. There's going to be agents for everything, and so I think getting good at building agents for yourself is a very useful skill. Another thing that I'm sort of looking at is that it feels to me like these big models, like these large LLMs, like ChatGPT, for example, they're kind of like the base layer of a new operating system, because in a
hmm,
way it's like software. Like the
yeah,
LLM is like Windows. It's like a basic operating system, but on top of the LLM you can start writing programs. You make software with the LLM by prompting it to do certain things, by fine tuning it,
right.
etc. And so I think learning how to make software in this new layer, like this new LLM OS
Oh,
layer, is
it's
is a is a very interesting sort of area to keep up with. And right now, it's mostly programming LLMs, but like in 5 years, this is going to be fully multimodal. Like these models will have tokens for audio, texts, images, video, like everything. And I think we will really see a new sort of programming paradigm that sits on top of these foundation models. And so, getting good at the frameworks that do that kind of programming, I think, is where a lot of the most interesting stuff is happening. And so, something like what I was mentioning, like Comfy UI, feels like a very sort of early prototype version of something like this, where it's a node based interface where all of the nodes are like different intelligence components. They're like small pieces of a model that does a very specific thing. And now you can wire them up in different ways. And now you have a software program that's built off these like small AI components. And so, yeah, I think that's a very interesting space. Um, and then the third thing is also something that we're interested in with Eden is this like curation layer, right? Because if you think about a company like Midjourney, Midjourney started with basically they had Stable Diffusion, like the same text to image model that anyone else had, but then they did a very clever thing is that they built a really good feedback system. If you type a
right.
prompt on Midjourney, you get four images and you click the one that
First,
you prefer, right? You
yeah,
choose the best one, and if you do this for 10 million times, suddenly you have a very rich data set to fine tune your model on. And now they have the best image generator in the world. And so I think another very interesting sort of area for startups is to build curation layers on top of generative models to personalize them with user feedback. And this is things like RLHF, it's like direct preference optimization. There's all these different algorithms to do that. But I think that's a very interesting space of how do you design products and user interfaces that leverage like human feedback to then go and make the models better. Yeah.
very interesting. And any thoughts on the area where you did your PhD? So, brain and machine interface.
Right.
How's that going to?
So, I mean, I'm not super up to date with like all of the recent stuff. I so there's like two ways, right? Like I think um, companies like Neuralink are probably very close to being able to have a pretty good interface that is one way in the sense that it's pretty good at reading signals from the brain and interpreting
Yeah,
what the brain is doing. Um, but I think the bottleneck is that you kind of also want to have the interface going the other way, where you can actually send information back into the brain, and I think that is like much harder to do. So I'm sort of like I mean, I'm interested in that space, but I also feel like that the challenges there are actually very hard because this is something that I love about having worked in biology for a couple of years is that I fully am like I appreciate how complicated biology is. Like our body, like honestly, like every time I need a moment, like if you just contemplate the incredible technology that's in your body right now, it
yeah,
is just like mild. Like there's this really cool story of a biologist who said like imagine that a spaceship lands in your backyard and they open the door and they invite you to come take a look at their spaceship and they're like, do you want to see our technology? And you're like, yeah, sure. You go inside and the technology is like billions of years beyond anything that we can imagine. Well, this is your body. Your body is
yeah.
that. It's so
That is
complicated,
true.
it's so like beautiful the way that it works. It's pretty like
Yeah,
yeah, it's kind of nice.
that is true. That is true. Great. Xander, towards the end of each show, we have a rapid fire questions with our
Sure.
guests, and the idea is
Yeah,
to
yeah.
just know you better as a person. So, what does a vacation look like for you?
I have a van, a converted van with like a bed and a kitchen and a solar panel. And like my favorite vacation is to just take my van with a couple of friends and to go rock climbing. Like I'm a very, I love rock climbing, being out in nature. And it acts a little bit as like a balance with my digital life. Like I spend a lot
Mhm.
of my time in front of a screen. And so from time to time, I really enjoy going out in nature, not having any cell phone reception, and just like, being present in the moments because I feel like those things are very important to being human as well.
Right. And what does your typical day look like today?
Honestly, I feel like I'm this unique individual. I don't really have typical days. Like I feel like my life
Mhm.
is very chaotic sometimes. Like I travel a lot. But like right now I'm in Belgium, so my typical day is really that I get up, I eat breakfast, I go in front of my computer and I start like programming, building agents, building pipelines. And then I think, around 5 or 6 p.m. I have an electric unicycle. It's like these
Okay.
wheels that have a battery.
Mhm.
So I'll take
Mhm.
my wheel and I'll drive to the climbing gym, go for some rock climbing, and then maybe after get a beer in a Belgian bar with some friends. Yeah, I think that's a
And
typical weekday. Yeah,
great. Thanks. Thanks a lot, Xander, for taking time out and then
of
doing
course.
this
Yeah,
podcast. As
this was a great
always,
talk.
loved interacting, and I think there is so much to take away from the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. So good to be here. Thank you so much.